The blood from Emma Gardner's split lip trickled down her chin as she ran blindly through the dusty streets of Silverdale, Arizona Territory, 1878. Her vision blurred with tears, the afternoon sun beating down mercilessly as she fled the general store and the man who'd just struck her for refusing his advances. Gasping for breath, her corset too tight against her heaving chest, Grace Belmont ducked behind the whitewashed church at the edge of town, collapsing against its weathered boards as sobs racked her slender frame. She pressed trembling fingers to her swollen lip, the metallic taste of blood filling her mouth. How had her life come to this? 20 years old and utterly alone in a frontier town that had never wanted her, working for a shopkeeper who'd made it clear her continued employment depended on favors she refused to give. The distant sound of horses approaching made her press deeper into the shadows. She couldn't let anyone see her like this, broken, bleeding, defeated. Grace hadn't heard the soft footfalls approaching from the other side of the church until a deep voice cut through her misery. "Miss, are you hurt?" She startled, nearly stumbling as she scrambled to her feet, ready to flee again. But the sight before her froze her in place. A tall man stood watching her, his broad-shouldered silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. Despite the shadows obscuring his features, she could make out a strong jawline beneath several days' worth of stubble and eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "I'm fine," she lied, hastily wiping tears from her cheeks. "Just needed a moment alone." The stranger stepped closer, and Grace instinctively backed away. But there was something in his expression, not pity, but a quiet understanding that made her pause. "You're bleeding," he said simply, pulling a clean handkerchief from his pocket and offering it to her. When she didn't take it, he didn't push, just studied her with those penetrating eyes. "Prayers answered," he said softly, almost to himself. "You're mine." Grace blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" The man seemed to catch himself, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. "I've been praying for guidance. For a sign." He gestured vaguely toward the church. "I just came from inside. Asked the Lord to show me why I felt drawn to stay in this town when everything in me says to move on." His voice lowered. "Then I found you." Under different circumstances, Grace might have laughed at such presumption. Instead, she found herself speechless, staring at this strange cowboy who spoke of divine intervention while offering her a handkerchief for her bloodied lip. "Isaac Larson," he said, extending his hand. When she didn't take it, he nodded as if he'd expected as much. "New in town. Just hired on at the Rocking M." Grace recognized the name of the largest cattle ranch in the territory. "The Rocking M doesn't hire drifters," she said suspiciously. A smile touched his lips. "They do, when the drifter once saved the owner's son from drowning." He stepped closer, still holding out the handkerchief. "Please, for your lip." This time she took it, pressing the soft cloth against her swollen mouth. "Thank you, Mr. Larson." "Isaac," he corrected gently. "And you are?" She hesitated. "Grace. Grace Belmont." "Miss Belmont." He tipped his hat. "Would you tell me who did that to your face so I can have a conversation with him about how to treat a lady?" His calm tone belied the steel beneath his words. Grace shook her head quickly. "It doesn't matter. I'm leaving Silverdale anyway. Tonight, if I can." "Leaving?" His brow furrowed. "Where will you go?" "Tucson, maybe California." "Anywhere but here," she thought. Isaac studied her for a long moment. "You have family there?" Grace stiffened. "That's none of your concern, Mr. Larson." "No," he agreed. "But a young woman traveling alone is dangerous. Even more so if she's fleeing something or someone." Before Grace could respond, the church door creaked open, and Pastor Williams emerged, his aging face lighting with surprise at the sight of them. "Miss Belmont! Mr. Larson!" The elderly pastor looked between them with obvious curiosity. "I didn't realize you two were acquainted." "We just met," Grace said quickly, trying to angle her face away to hide her injured lip. The pastor's kind eyes missed nothing. "Child, you're hurt. Come inside, let me help you." "I'm fine, Pastor, truly." Isaac cleared his throat. "Pastor Williams, Miss Belmont was just telling me she's planning to leave town tonight." "Alone." The pastor's face fell. "Is that wise, my dear? The stagecoach doesn't come through until Tuesday." "I'll find a way," Grace insisted. "Because of Hank Donovan?" the pastor asked gently. Grace's silence was answer enough. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Donovan? The shopkeeper?" "He's more than that," the pastor said gravely. "He owns half the businesses in town, including the boarding house where Miss Belmont stays." "And he did this to your face?" Isaac asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Grace lifted her chin. "I refused his proposition. He made it clear my continued employment and lodging depended on my acceptance." Isaac's expression darkened. "No man has the right—" "Mr. Larson," she interrupted, "while I appreciate your concern, this isn't your problem to solve." "Perhaps not," he conceded. "But I can offer a solution. The Rocking M needs a cook's assistant. It's honest work, fair pay, and you'd have a roof over your head away from Donovan's reach." Grace stared at him. "You just met me. Why would you help me?" Isaac's gaze was steady. "Because it's what decent folks do, Miss Belmont." "He's right, my dear," Pastor Williams added. "The Rocking M is a respectable operation. Old man McCready runs a tight ship, but he's fair." Grace hesitated, clutching the bloodied handkerchief. The prospect of leaving Silverdale had seemed her only escape, but she had barely enough money for a stagecoach ticket, let alone establishing herself somewhere new. And what if Donovan came after her before she could leave? Would I be safe there?" she asked quietly. Something in Isaac's expression softened. "I give you my word." Grace glanced at the pastor, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Larson is a good man, Miss Belmont. I vouch for him." She took a deep breath. "When would I start?" "Now," Isaac said simply. "I've got my horse at the hitching post. We can stop by your lodgings for your belongings and be at the ranch before sunset." The decisiveness of his plan startled her. "But unless you'd prefer to risk encountering Donovan again," Isaac pointed out. Grace touched her swollen lip, decision crystallizing. "Give me 20 minutes to gather my things." Isaac nodded. "I'll wait out front with my horse." As Grace hurried toward the boarding house, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake, placing her trust in a stranger. But the alternative, staying in Silverdale at Donovan's mercy, was unthinkable. Perhaps this cowboy truly was an answer to prayers she hadn't even known to speak. Grace slipped into the boarding house through the back entrance, praying Mrs. Winters wouldn't notice her. The older woman was firmly in Donovan's pocket and would surely report Grace's movements. Hurrying up the narrow stairs to her small room, Grace pulled her carpetbag from beneath the bed and began filling it with her meager possessions. 2 dresses, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, and the small leather-bound journal her mother had given her before she died. Her fingers lingered on the worn cover, tracing the faded, embossed flowers. What would her mother think of her situation now? Of her decision to trust a stranger named Isaac Larson? A floorboard creaked in the hallway, and Grace froze. Heavy footsteps approached her door, followed by 3 sharp knocks. "Grace, open up. We need to talk." Hank Donovan. Her heart pounding, Grace scanned the room for an escape. The window was her only option, but her room was on the 2nd floor with a steep drop to the alley below. "I know you're in there," Donovan called, his voice hardening. "Mrs. Winters saw you come in. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Grace swallowed her fear and finished packing, securing the carpetbag with trembling hands. She had to get out. The doorknob rattled as Donovan tried to enter. "Grace!" His voice rose with impatience. "I'm sorry about earlier. I lost my temper." Open the door so we can discuss this like adults. Like adults, as if striking her had been somehow mature. Grace moved silently to the window and pushed it open, wincing at the slight creak. The drop was daunting, but a narrow ledge ran along the building's exterior. If she could shimmy along it to the trellis at the corner of the house. The door shuddered as Donovan slammed his shoulder against it. "Damn it, girl! Open this door or I'll break it down!" Grace didn't hesitate. Clutching her carpet bag, she eased out onto the ledge, pressing her back against the clapboard siding. Heart racing, she inched sideways, trying not to look down at the hard-packed dirt of the alley 2 stories below. Behind her, the door splintered as Donovan forced his way in. "Where are you, you little—" His curse cut off as he spotted her through the open window. "Grace, get back in here before you kill yourself." She ignored him, focusing on placing one foot carefully in front of the other. Just a few more feet to the trellis. The wooden lattice wasn't meant to support a person's weight, but it was her only chance. "Grace!" Donovan leaned out the window, his face contorted with fury. "You think you can run from me? In my town?" She reached the trellis and tested it with one hand. It creaked, but held. Taking a deep breath, Grace transferred her weight onto the wooden framework, praying it wouldn't collapse beneath her. The carpet bag made her movements awkward as she began climbing down, splinters digging into her palms. Halfway down, the trellis groaned ominously. Grace quickened her descent, jumping the last few feet to the ground. Pain shot through her ankles, but she pushed past it, running down the alley toward the main street where Isaac had promised to wait. She heard Donovan's shouts behind her as he presumably raced downstairs to pursue her. Grace ran faster, her lungs burning, the carpet bag banging against her leg with each stride. As she rounded the corner onto Main Street, she spotted Isaac standing beside a sturdy chestnut gelding, his expression changing from patience to alarm as he caught sight of her. "He's coming!" she gasped as she reached him. Without hesitation, Isaac lifted her onto his horse, handed her the carpet bag, and swung up behind her in one fluid motion. His arms circled her waist as he took the reins, urging the horse into a gallop just as Donovan burst onto the street, red-faced and shouting. "This isn't over, Grace!" Donovan yelled after them. "You hear me? This isn't over!" Grace didn't look back, focusing instead on the solid warmth of Isaac behind her as they raced out of Silverdale, dust billowing in their wake. His arm around her waist was firm but respectful, holding her securely without presumption. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice close to her ear to be heard over the pounding hooves. "Yes," she managed, though her heart still raced with fear and adrenaline. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Isaac replied. "We've got an hour's ride ahead of us." As they left the town behind, Grace felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. She was leaving everything familiar, placing her trust in a man she'd met mere hours ago, all on the strength of a pastor's recommendation and her own desperate need to escape. Yet somehow, pressed against Isaac's chest as they rode across the vast Arizona landscape, she felt safer than she had in months. The rocking M Ranch sprawled across the valley, its main house standing proudly on a slight rise overlooking corrals, barns, and bunkhouses. As Isaac guided his horse through the main gate, Grace took in the bustling activity: cowboys leading horses, hands mending fences, a woman hanging laundry near what must be the cookhouse. "It's bigger than I expected," Grace admitted as they approached the main house. "McCready runs 5,000 head of cattle," Isaac explained. "Takes a lot of hands to manage an operation this size." He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Grace was acutely aware of his hands at her waist, strong and steady as he lifted her effortlessly to the ground. She smoothed her skirts self-consciously, painfully aware of her disheveled appearance after their hasty departure. "Mr. Larson!" A booming voice called from the direction of the main house. A stocky man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed beard strode toward them, his weathered face creased with curiosity. Didn't expect you back so soon, and with company, no less. Mr. McCready, Isaac greeted him, doffing his hat respectfully. This is Miss Grace Belmont. I mentioned we needed help in the cookhouse, and Miss Belmont was looking for a position. McCready's shrewd eyes took in Grace's split lip and disheveled appearance. Something like understanding flickered across his face before he nodded briskly. Mrs. Holloway's been complaining about needing another pair of hands since Betsy left to get married. You have experience cooking, Miss Belmont? Yes, sir, Grace answered, standing straighter despite her fatigue. I've worked in boarding houses and as a shopkeeper's assistant. I know my way around a kitchen. McCready studied her for another moment before nodding. Very well. Isaac can show you to the women's quarters and introduce you to Mrs. Holloway. He turned to Isaac. Once you've settled Miss Belmont, come see me in my office. Need to discuss the new breeding stock arriving next week. With that, the rancher turned and strode back toward the main house, leaving Grace and Isaac standing in the yard. He seems direct, Grace observed. Isaac chuckled. That's putting it kindly, but he's fair. Like I said. He gathered the reins of his horse. Let's get you settled before Mrs. Holloway rings the dinner bell. She'll be glad for the help tonight. He led her toward a modest cabin set apart from the bunkhouses. The women's quarters, he explained. Mrs. Holloway stays here, along with Maria, who helps with laundry and cleaning. You'll have your own room, small, but private. As they approached, a plump woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the cabin, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Grace. Land sakes, Isaac Larson, who's this you're bringing to my doorstep? Mrs. Holloway, this is Miss Grace Belmont. Mr. McCready just hired her to assist you in the cookhouse. The older woman's gaze softened as she noticed Grace's injured lip. Well, come in, child. You look like you could use a cup of tea and a sit-down. She shot Isaac a look. And you can make yourself scarce, Mr. Larson. Boss is looking for you, I expect. Isaac tipped his hat to both women. I'll leave you in Mrs. Holloway's capable hands, Miss Belmont. See you at supper. As he led his horse toward the stables, Mrs. Holloway gently guided Grace inside. Let's get you settled, dear. Then you can tell me as much or as little as you want about how you came to be here with a split lip and that cowboy as your escort. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable, with a small common area, a kitchen, and doors leading to what Grace assumed were bedrooms. Mrs. Holloway led her to one such door, opening it to reveal a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the ranch yard. It's not fancy, Mrs. Holloway said, but it's yours for as long as you work here. Grace set her carpetbag on the bed, emotion suddenly welling in her throat. It's perfect. Thank you. The older woman patted her arm. Get yourself freshened up. Bathroom's through there with a pump for water. Then come to the kitchen and we'll have that tea before I put you to work helping with supper. 25 hungry cowboys wait for no woman's tears. Left alone, Grace sank onto the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She touched her swollen lip gingerly, thinking of how differently things might have gone had Isaac Larson not found her behind that church. His words echoed in her mind, prayers answered. You're mine. What had he meant by that? Not possession, surely. He'd been nothing but respectful. Perhaps he truly believed divine intervention had brought them together. Grace wasn't sure what she believed anymore, but she was grateful for whatever circumstances had led him to find her when she needed help most. After washing her face and tidying her hair, Grace joined Mrs. Holloway in the kitchen. The cook handed her a cup of tea and began explaining the routine of the ranch breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at dusk, with 25 to 30 men to feed at each meal, plus the ranch owner and his son when they dined at the main house. It's hard work, Mrs. Holloway warned her, but honest. And no man here will raise a hand to you, not if they want to keep their jobs or their teeth. Grace sipped her tea, the warmth soothing her bruised lip. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "Good." The older woman nodded approvingly. "Now, can you make biscuits?" For the next 2 hours, Grace worked alongside Mrs. Holloway, kneading dough for biscuits, peeling potatoes, and helping prepare a hearty beef stew. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from her thoughts, and Mrs. Holloway's constant stream of ranch gossip and cooking advice kept Grace engaged. As the dinner bell rang, calling the ranch hands to their evening meal, Grace found herself stationed behind a large serving table in the dining hall, ladling stew into bowls as the men filed past. Most nodded politely or tipped their hats to her, curious but respectful. A few openly stared at her split lip, but none commented. Isaac was among the last to enter, his hair damp as if he'd just washed up. When he reached Grace's station, he paused. "How are you settling in?" he asked quietly. "Well enough," she replied, ladling stew into his bowl. "Mrs. Holloway has been kind. She's a good woman, straight-talking, but fair." "Like Mr. McCready?" A smile touched Isaac's lips. "You catch on quick." "Miss Belmont." Their conversation was interrupted by shouts from outside, followed by the sound of approaching horses. Through the dining hall windows, Grace saw riders entering the ranch yard at speed. Isaac's expression darkened. "Donovan?" he muttered, setting down his bowl. Grace's heart stuttered. "Here? How?" "Stay inside," Isaac instructed, already moving toward the door. Other cowboys were rising from their benches, sensing trouble. "What's happening?" Mrs. Holloway appeared at Grace's elbow. "Hank Donovan," Grace whispered, fear closing her throat. "From Silverdale." The older woman's face hardened. "So that's how it is." She took the ladle from Grace's trembling hand. "Go to your room and lock the door, child. This won't be pretty." Grace hesitated, torn between hiding and seeing what was happening. Through the window, she could see Donovan dismounting, flanked by 3 men she recognized as his cronies from Silverdale. Isaac and several Rockingham cowboys stood facing them, tension visible in their stances. Unable to retreat without knowing what was happening, Grace moved to the door, staying inside, but within earshot of the confrontation unfolding in the yard. "I've come for what's mine, Larson," Donovan's voice carried clearly. "The girl works for me. She stole from my store before running off." "That's a lie," Isaac replied evenly. "Miss Belmont is employed here now, legally and willingly. Whatever grievance you think you have, you can take it up with the sheriff." Donovan laughed harshly. "Sheriff Jenkins? He knows better than to cross me. Now stand aside." "Not happening, Donovan." Isaac's voice remained calm, but Grace could see his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Miss Belmont stays here of her own free will. You and your men need to leave." The standoff stretched, tension crackling in the air. Grace's heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Then McCready emerged from the main house, rifle in hand. "Problem here, gentlemen?" he asked mildly, though his stance was anything but casual. "These men were just leaving, Mr. McCready," Isaac answered without taking his eyes off Donovan. "This isn't your concern, McCready," Donovan snapped. "The girl stole from me. I'm within my rights to take her back." "On my land, everything's my concern," McCready replied, "and I don't recall seeing any proof of theft. What I do see is 4 men trespassing at supper time, interrupting my outfit's meal." He leveled the rifle casually. "Now, Mr. Donovan, I suggest you and your friends turn around and head back to Silverdale. Whatever dispute you have can be settled in town, through proper channels." Donovan's face flushed with anger, but he was clearly reconsidering the wisdom of his position. McCready's ranch hands had now surrounded the visitors, outnumbering them significantly. "This isn't over," Donovan snarled, echoing his earlier threat to Grace. "That girl has obligations in Silverdale. She can't hide here forever." "Seems to me the only obligation Miss Belmont has is to herself," Isaac replied. And she's chosen to work here. Donovan's gaze shifted to the dining hall where Grace stood partially visible in the doorway. Their eyes met briefly, his filled with malice, hers with defiance despite her fear. "We're leaving," Donovan announced abruptly, turning back to his horse. "But mark my words, this isn't finished. Not by a long shot." As the unwelcome visitors rode away, Grace released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Isaac glanced back at the dining hall, his eyes finding hers. In that moment, something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement that her troubles with Donovan were far from over. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen cleaned, Grace sat on the edge of her bed, writing in her journal by lamplight. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Grace? It's Mrs. Holloway. May I come in?" She closed her journal quickly. "Yes, of course." The door opened to reveal not only Mrs. Holloway, but Isaac as well, standing respectfully in the hallway. "Mr. Larson wanted to check on you," Mrs. Holloway explained. "I told him he could speak to you in the common room, with me present as propriety demands." Grace set aside her journal and followed them to the small sitting area. Isaac remained standing as the women took seats. "I wanted to apologize for bringing trouble to your doorstep," Grace began, but Isaac shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for. Donovan is the problem, not you. Nevertheless, he followed me here, put everyone at risk." "Wouldn't be the first time the Rocking M has faced down trouble," Mrs. Holloway interjected. "Won't be the last either." Isaac leaned against the doorframe, his expression serious. "Donovan isn't likely to give up easily. Men like him consider rejection a challenge, not a final answer. And he clearly has influence in Silverdale." "What can I do?" Grace asked, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "I won't run again. I'm tired of running, but I won't put this ranch and its people in danger either." "You'll do nothing except your job," Mrs. Holloway said firmly. "The men of this ranch can handle Hank Donovan and his ilk." Isaac nodded agreement. "Mr. McCready is sending riders to notify the territorial marshal tomorrow. Donovan may have the local sheriff in his pocket, but the marshal is another matter entirely. In the meantime," Mrs. Holloway added, "you won't go anywhere alone, not to town, not even to the barn. Clear?" Grace wanted to protest such restrictions, but the practical part of her recognized the wisdom in their caution. "Clear," she agreed reluctantly. "Good," Isaac said. "Now, I should let you ladies get some rest. Dawn comes early on a ranch." He straightened, tipping his hat to both women. "Good night, Mrs. Holloway. Miss Belmont." As he turned to leave, Grace called after him. "Mr. Larson, Isaac." He paused, looking back at her. "Thank you. Again." A small smile touched his lips. "Sleep well, Grace." After he'd gone, Mrs. Holloway gave Grace a knowing look. "That young man rode into Silverdale specifically to check on a mare Mr. McCready was considering purchasing. Ended up bringing back something else entirely." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not like that. He was just being kind." "Hmm," the older woman hummed skeptically. "Kind he certainly is. But there's more than kindness in the way that man looks at you." "We barely know each other," Grace protested. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Mrs. Holloway replied sagely. "One moment, one meeting, and your whole life changes course." She patted Grace's knee as she rose. "Get some sleep, child. Tomorrow starts early. And there's bread to bake." Alone in her room once more, Grace reopened her journal, staring at the blank page before slowly beginning to write. "Today I met a man who said I was the answer to his prayers. Perhaps, in a way I don't yet understand, he was the answer to mine." The next few days established a rhythm to Grace's new life at the Rocking M. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Holloway prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, spent the morning baking bread and preparing the noon meal, then had a brief respite in the afternoon before beginning supper preparations. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time in years, Grace felt a sense of purpose and security. Isaac Larson was often absent during the days, riding with the other cowboys to check fence lines, move cattle, or attend to the myriad tasks required to run a successful ranch. But he was always present at mealtimes, his eyes finding hers across the dining hall, offering a quiet nod or smile that increasingly caused a flutter in her chest she tried desperately to ignore. On her fourth evening at the ranch, as Grace was hanging laundry behind the women's quarters, she sensed someone approaching. Turning, she found Isaac leading his horse, his expression tired but brightening at the sight of her. "Evening, Miss Belmont," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Mrs. Holloway working you hard, I see." Grace smiled, pinning a sheet to the line. "No harder than Mr. McCready works you, I imagine. You look exhausted." "Moving cattle to the north pasture," he explained, leaning against the fence. "Long day in the saddle." She nodded, continuing with her task. "Any word from the marshal about Donovan?" "Not yet. These things take time." He watched her for a moment. "How are you settling in?" "Truly." Grace considered the question. "Better than I expected. Mrs. Holloway is strict but kind, and the work—" She paused, searching for words. "It feels good to be useful, to have a place." "You didn't have that in Silverdale?" She shook her head, memories of her lonely existence there rising unbidden. "I was tolerated, not wanted. My parents died 2 years ago, influenza. I had nowhere else to go, so I stayed on, taking whatever work I could find." Her hands stilled on the laundry. "Donovan offered me a position in his store 6 months ago. I was grateful at first, until I realized what he really wanted from me." Isaac's jaw tightened. "And no one in town stood up for you?" "Donovan owns half the businesses in Silverdale," Grace replied simply. "People depend on him for their livelihoods. Few are willing to cross him." "Including the pastor?" Grace sighed. "Pastor Williams is a good man, but elderly and frail. He offers comfort and counsel, not protection." She pinned the last item to the line and turned to face Isaac fully. "What about you? You mentioned being a drifter before coming to the Rocking M. What brought you to these parts?" Something flickered in Isaac's eyes, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "I was a rancher's son in Nebraska. Had my own spread for a while after my father passed. Then the war came." "You fought?" He nodded. "Union cavalry. By the time I came home, my ranch had been seized for back taxes I knew nothing about. My wife had given up waiting and married the banker who'd foreclosed on our property." Grace's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." Isaac shrugged, but she could see the gesture cost him. "It was a long time ago. 12 years now." "And you've been drifting since?" "More or less. Worked ranches from Texas to Montana. Never stayed anywhere long." His gaze met hers, unexpectedly intense. "Until now." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken meaning. Grace found herself unable to look away from his eyes, gray-blue like the sky before a storm, and just as turbulent with emotion. "Why now?" she asked softly. "Why here?" Isaac took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his irises. "I told you the day we met. I asked for a sign, and I found you." Grace's heart pounded as she struggled to make sense of her feelings. This man was still largely a stranger, yet something about him called to her, made her feel safe in a way she hadn't since her parents died. "I don't know what to say to that," she admitted. A smile touched his lips. "You don't have to say anything. Just don't run away again." Before she could respond, Mrs. Holloway's voice called from the cabin. "Grace, supper needs tending." The moment broken, Grace stepped back. "I should go." Isaac nodded, replacing his hat. "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "Would you walk with me tomorrow? After the noon meal? There's a spot by the creek I'd like to show you." Grace knew she should refuse. Getting too close to Isaac Larson would only complicate her already precarious situation. Yet she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." His smile, warm and genuine, made her heart skip. "Until tomorrow, then." As he led his horse toward the stables, Grace hurried inside, her thoughts in turmoil. She was attracted to Isaac. She couldn't deny it. But was she simply transferring her gratitude into something more? And what of his interest in her? Was it merely protective instinct, or something deeper? Mrs. Holloway gave her a knowing look as Grace entered the kitchen, flushed and distracted. "That cowboy's got you all aflutter, hasn't he?" "I don't know what you mean," Grace replied unconvincingly, reaching for her apron. The older woman chuckled. "Child, I've been around long enough to recognize the signs. Just be careful with your heart. Isaac Larson is a good man, but he carries ghosts." "Don't we all?" Grace murmured, turning her attention to the stew bubbling on the stove. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant sounds of the ranch settling for the night, Grace found her thoughts returning again and again to Isaac. To the pain in his eyes when he spoke of his past, to the warmth in his smile when he looked at her. Was she foolish to feel this connection to him so quickly? Or was there something to his belief that their meeting had been divinely orchestrated? Grace had never been one for grand romantic notions. Life had taught her to be practical, cautious. Yet something about Isaac Larson made her want to believe in possibilities she'd long since dismissed. The following day dawned clear and warm, a perfect late spring morning in the Arizona Territory. Grace went about her duties with an extra awareness of the passing hours, anticipation building for her walk with Isaac. Mrs. Holloway noticed her distraction, but said nothing beyond a raised eyebrow and a subtle smile. After the noon meal had been served and the dishes washed, Grace changed into her second dress, a simple blue cotton that her mother had always said brought out the color in her eyes, and pinned her hair more carefully than usual. As she stepped outside, she found Isaac waiting by the garden gate, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt beneath his worn leather vest. "You look lovely," he said simply, offering his arm. Grace took it, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath her fingertips. "Thank you. Where are we going?" "There's a spot by the creek, about half a mile from the ranch house. Shady, quiet. Thought you might appreciate a peaceful place to sit and talk." They walked in companionable silence at first, Grace taking in the beauty of the ranch lands stretching around them. Rolling hills dotted with cattle, stands of cottonwood trees marking watercourses, distant mountains purple against the horizon. "It's beautiful here," she remarked. "Different from Nebraska, I imagine." Isaac nodded. "Nebraska's flatter. Good farmland. This country's wilder, but there's something about it that speaks to me." He glanced down at her. "Do you miss Silverdale?" Grace considered the question. "Not the place itself. But I miss having a church to attend on Sundays. And the library, small as it was, I loved borrowing books." "You like to read?" "Very much. My father taught school before we moved west. Our house was always full of books." She smiled at the memory. "Mother used to complain he spent money on books when we needed practical things." "What kind of books do you prefer?" "Anything I can get my hands on, really. History, poetry." She blushed slightly. "And novels, when I can find them. Stories of far-off places and different lives." Isaac led her down a gentle slope toward a creek lined with cottonwoods and willows. "Mr. McCready has quite a library in the main house. His late wife was an educated woman who insisted on bringing culture to the frontier. I'm sure he'd let you borrow books if you asked." "Really?" Grace's face brightened at the prospect. "Really." Isaac guided her to a fallen log beneath a massive cottonwood, its shade creating a cool oasis beside the burbling creek. "This is the spot I wanted to show you." Grace sat on the smooth trunk, arranging her skirts as Isaac settled beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. The creek chattered over stones, and birds called from the branches above. It was, as Isaac had promised, peaceful. "How did you find this place?" she asked. "First week I was here. I was riding fence lines, getting to know the property. Stopped for water and just stayed a while." He smiled slightly. "I come here to think sometimes, to pray, when I need to sort things out." Grace studied his profile, strong jaw, straight nose, the slight crow's feet at the corners of his eyes speaking of both laughter and hardship. "And have you been sorting things out lately?" Isaac turned to meet her gaze. "Trying to. My life hasn't had much direction these past years. Just moving from place to place, job to job. But lately," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Lately I've been thinking it might be time to stop wandering." "Because of a sign?" Grace asked softly, recalling his words behind the church. "Because of you," he replied simply. The directness of his answer took her breath away. "Isaac, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he said. "I know you're brave and kind, hardworking, strong enough to leave a bad situation rather than compromise yourself. And I know that from the moment I saw you behind that church, I've not been able to think of much else." Grace's heart raced at his words, both thrilling and frightening in their intensity. "What are you saying?" Isaac shifted to face her more directly. "I'm saying I'd like the chance to court you properly, Grace Belmont, to see if what I feel might be returned, given time." Grace stared at him, conflicting emotions warring within her. Attraction, certainly, a growing affection, but also fear of moving too quickly, of mistaking gratitude for deeper feelings, of opening herself to potential heartbreak. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Everything's happening so fast. A week ago, I didn't even know you existed." "You don't have to answer now," Isaac assured her. "I'm not going anywhere. Take all the time you need." Relief washed through her at his understanding. "Thank you. I do care for you, Isaac. I just need to be sure of my own heart before I make any promises." He nodded, a smile warming his eyes. "That's fair." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "May I at least hope?" Grace found herself returning his smile. "Yes, you may hope." The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Then a gunshot cracked the stillness, followed by shouts from the direction of the ranch. Isaac was on his feet instantly, pulling Grace up beside him. "Stay close," he ordered, his expression hardening as he drew his pistol. They hurried back toward the ranch, Isaac keeping Grace slightly behind him as they crested the hill overlooking the buildings. Below, chaos had erupted. Riders, at least a dozen, were circling the main yard, exchanging gunfire with ranch hands who had taken cover behind wagons and water troughs. "Donovan," Grace whispered, recognizing the shopkeeper among the attackers. "He's brought more men this time," Isaac observed grimly. "Grace, I need you to stay here, out of sight. I have to help." "No." She clutched his arm. "There are too many of them. You'll be killed." "I can't abandon my friends." His expression softened as he looked at her. "Stay hidden in those trees. If things go badly, run east toward the Peterson place. It's about 5 miles. They'll help you." Before she could protest further, Isaac pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her forehead and was gone, running in a crouch down the hill toward the gunfight. Grace watched in horror as he disappeared into the smoke and confusion below. Gunfire continued to echo across the ranch yard, punctuated by shouts and the frightened whinnying of horses. She should run and hide as Isaac had instructed, but the thought of cowering in the trees while he and others fought, possibly died because of her, was unbearable. Decision made, Grace gathered her skirts and began making her way down the hill, using the scattered juniper bushes for cover. Her goal wasn't the main yard where the fighting was fiercest, but the women's quarters where Mrs. Holloway might need help. She had nearly reached the cabin when a horse and rider appeared suddenly from between buildings, cutting off her path. Hank Donovan's face twisted with triumph as he recognized her. "There you are," he snarled, dismounting and advancing on her. "Thought you'd humiliate me, did you? Thought you could just run away?" Grace backed away, searching desperately for a weapon, an escape route, anything. "Leave me alone, Donovan. I never wanted trouble. Should have thought of that before you ran off with that cowboy." He reached for her, but Grace dodged, turning to flee. Donovan lunged, catching her arm in a bruising grip. "You're coming back to Silverdale with me, one way or another." "Let her go, Donovan." Isaac's voice, cold with fury, came from behind them. Grace felt a surge of relief that quickly turned to terror as she saw Donovan's free hand move to his holster. "Back off, Larson," Donovan warned, using Grace as a shield as he turned to face Isaac. "This isn't your concern." Isaac stood 20 feet away, his pistol aimed steadily at Donovan. "I'm making it my concern. Release her, now." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Donovan shoved Grace roughly aside, his hand flashing to his gun. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from either man's weapon. Donovan staggered, a look of shock on his face as he clutched his shoulder. Behind Isaac, McCready stood with a smoking rifle. "That's enough," the rancher said firmly. "My men have already subdued your friends, Donovan. It's over." Donovan sank to his knees, blood seeping between his fingers where he clutched his wound. "You've made a powerful enemy today, McCready." "No," McCready corrected him. "I've reminded a bully of his place." He nodded to Isaac. "Tie him up with the others. Marshal Johnson and his deputies just rode in." Seems they were already on their way to investigate complaints about Donovan's business practices in Silverdale. As Isaac moved to secure Donovan, Grace rushed to McCready's side. "Is everyone all right? Mrs. Holloway? The other hands?" "A few minor injuries, nothing serious," McCready assured her. "Donovan's men weren't expecting us to be ready for them." "We had warning." "Warning? How?" McCready's weathered face creased in a smile. "Seems one of Donovan's own men got cold feet about attacking a ranch full of innocent people. Rode out last night to tip us off. We were prepared." Relief made Grace's knees weak. "Thank God." "Indeed," McCready agreed. "Now, let's get you inside. Mrs. Holloway's probably worried sick." The aftermath of the attack was a flurry of activity. Marshal Johnson and his deputies took statements from everyone involved, building a case against Donovan not just for the attack on the Rocking M, but for various illegal activities in Silverdale that witnesses were finally willing to testify about, now that his influence was waning. Grace found herself sitting on the porch of the main house as the sun began to set, watching as the last of the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport to the territorial jail. Isaac approached, a bandage wrapped around his left forearm where a bullet had grazed him. "You're hurt," Grace said as he sat beside her. "It's nothing," he assured her. "Barely a scratch." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the activity in the yard. "It's really over, isn't it?" Grace finally asked. "Donovan can't hurt anyone anymore." "Marshal Johnson says he'll likely spend years in prison," Isaac confirmed, "and even if he eventually gets out, his power in Silverdale is broken. People are already talking about electing a new town council, one not in Donovan's pocket." Grace nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "Where does that leave me?" she wondered aloud. Isaac turned to look at her, question in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I came here running from something. Now that threat is gone. I could go anywhere, do anything." She met his gaze steadily. "But I find I don't want to leave." A slow smile spread across Isaac's face. "Is that so?" "Yes," Grace admitted, feeling suddenly shy. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, by the creek." About courting me. Isaac's expression grew serious. And? And I think I'd like that very much. She smiled tentatively. If the offer still stands. In answer, Isaac reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. It does. As the last light of day painted the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grace felt a sense of peace settle over her. The future stretched before her, no longer threatening but full of promise. And beside her sat a man who had found her at her lowest moment and seen not weakness, but strength, not a burden, but a blessing. Prayers answered, she murmured, echoing his words from their first meeting. Isaac's smile deepened as he squeezed her hand. Yes, mine and yours both, it seems. 3 months later, Grace stood in Mrs. Holloway's room, watching nervously as the older woman adjusted the simple veil in her hair. The white dress borrowed from Mr. Macready's daughter who had married the previous spring was perhaps a bit too elaborate for a ranch cook's wedding, but Grace couldn't deny the thrill she felt seeing herself in its satin folds. "You look beautiful, child," Mrs. Holloway said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Isaac Larson is a fortunate man indeed." Grace smoothed the dress self-consciously. "Do you think it's too soon? We've only known each other a few months." The older woman snorted. "When it's right, it's right. No sense waiting when you both know your minds." She adjusted a flower in Grace's hair. "Besides, I've never seen two people more perfectly suited. Like you were made for each other." A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria, who had been helping with preparations, opened it to reveal Mr. Macready in his Sunday best. "Ladies," he greeted them, hat in hand. "Pastor Williams has arrived from Silverdale. Everyone's assembled at the creek." Grace's heart fluttered with nerves and excitement. After Donovan's arrest, Silverdale had undergone something of a renaissance. Pastor Williams, freed from the shopkeeper's influence, had been a frequent visitor to the Rocking M, counseling Grace and Isaac as their courtship blossomed into love. When Isaac proposed just 6 weeks after their first meeting, it seemed only fitting that the pastor should perform their ceremony. "Are you ready, Miss Belmont?" Macready asked, offering his arm. In the absence of her father, the rancher had volunteered to give her away a gesture that had brought tears to Grace's eyes when he suggested it. "Yes," she replied, taking a deep breath. "I'm ready." The walk to the creek, to the very spot where Isaac had first declared his intentions, was dreamlike. Ranch hands and their families lined the path, smiling and nodding as Grace passed. Ahead, beneath the sprawling cottonwood, Isaac waited beside Pastor Williams, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as he caught sight of his bride. As Macready placed her hand in Isaac's, Grace felt a certainty she had never known before. This man who had found her hiding and crying behind a church, who had offered help without condition, who had risked his life to protect her, was truly the answer to prayers she hadn't even known to speak. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Isaac Larson and Grace Belmont in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Isaac's voice never wavered, his eyes never leaving hers as he promised to love, honor, and cherish her all the days of his life. Grace's own voice trembled with emotion as she made the same promises in return. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Williams concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Isaac, you may kiss your bride." As Isaac drew her into his arms for their first kiss as husband and wife, cheers erupted from the assembled guests. Grace felt tears of joy spilling down her cheeks, matched by the moisture in Isaac's own eyes as he drew back to look at her. "Mrs. Larson," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Mr. Larson," she replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up near the creek, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Holloway and the women of nearby ranches. Music from fiddles and guitars filled the air as people danced and laughed beneath lanterns strung from the trees. As the night deepened, Isaac led Grace away from the festivities, back toward the ranch, where McCready had gifted them the use of a small cabin, once the foreman's quarters before he'd built his own home as a wedding present. "Happy?" Isaac asked as they walked hand in hand beneath the star-filled sky. "More than I ever imagined possible," Grace admitted. "A year ago, I wouldn't have believed this life could be mine. A husband who loves me, friends, a place where I belong." Isaac stopped, turning to face her in the moonlight. "When I found you behind that church, I thought I was helping you. I never realized you would end up saving me too." Grace tilted her head questioningly. "Saving you? How?" "From loneliness. From wandering without purpose." He touched her cheek gently. "I was lost for so long, Grace, until I found you." She leaned into his touch, her heart swelling with love for this man who had changed her life so completely. "Perhaps we found each other." Isaac smiled, drawing her close. "Perhaps we did." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Grace knew with absolute certainty that this was where she was meant to be, not hiding behind a church in tears, but standing beneath the vast Arizona sky in the arms of the man who had claimed her as his own, not through possession, but through a love that had answered both their prayers. Epilogue, 5 years later. The sound of children's laughter drifted through the open window of the ranch house as Grace put the finishing touches on a batch of apple pies. Through the kitchen doorway, she could see 3-year-old Thomas playing with his wooden horses on the parlor floor, while baby Eleanor slept peacefully in her cradle nearby. "Something smells mighty fine in here," Isaac's voice came from behind her as he entered through the back door, hanging his hat on the peg. Grace smiled as her husband's arms encircled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Apple pies for the harvest celebration tomorrow. Mrs. Holloway taught me her secret recipe before she retired." "Mmm," Isaac murmured, pressing a kiss to her neck. "Lucky man I am, married to the best cook in the territory." Grace laughed, turning in his embrace to face him. At 38, Isaac Larson was more handsome than ever, the Arizona sun having weathered his features in a way that only enhanced his rugged appeal. A few strands of silver now threaded through his dark hair, but his eyes, those expressive blue-gray eyes that had first captured her heart, remained unchanged. "How is the cattle drive?" she asked, noting the weariness in his stance. As foreman of the Rocking M for the past 3 years, Isaac had just returned from delivering a herd to the railroad in Tucson. "Successful. Got a good price, too." He smiled, the pride in his accomplishment evident. "McCready's talking about making me a partner next year. Says he's getting too old to run things alone, and his son's more interested in politics than ranching." Grace's eyes widened. "A partner? Isaac, that's wonderful." He nodded, his expression turning thoughtful. "It would mean we could finally build that house you've been dreaming of, the one with the big kitchen and the room for a library. And more bedrooms for the children we might still have," Grace teased, though the hope in her voice was genuine. Isaac's smile deepened as he laid a hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you telling me we need to start planning for that sooner rather than later?" Grace's cheeks flushed with pleasure at his quick understanding. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. Due in the spring." Joy transformed Isaac's tired features as he lifted her off her feet in a gentle embrace. "Grace Larson, you make me the happiest man alive." "Papa?" Thomas had noticed his father's return and came running, arms outstretched. Isaac scooped up his son, tickling him until the boy's giggles filled the kitchen. Watching them, Grace felt the familiar wave of gratitude that often overwhelmed her when she considered how drastically her life had changed. from a frightened young woman hiding behind a church, to this, a loving husband, beautiful children, a home filled with laughter and security. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Grace and Isaac sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they enjoyed a moment of peaceful companionship that had become the foundation of their marriage. "I've been thinking," Isaac said after a while, his voice thoughtful. "About? About opening a school here at the ranch, for the Hands children, and ours when they're old enough, with you as teacher." Grace lifted her head to look at him. "A school?" Isaac nodded. "You've mentioned missing your father's books, his love of learning, and I've seen how you light up when you're teaching Thomas his letters." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "You'd be wonderful at it, Grace." The suggestion touched her deeply. Though she loved her life as wife, mother, and ranch cook, there had always been a small part of her that yearned for the intellectual stimulation her childhood home had provided. The thought of creating a similar environment for her own children and others on the ranch filled her with excitement. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "Thank you for understanding me so well." Isaac kissed her forehead. "Just returning the favor, my love. You understood what I needed before I did myself." As night deepened around them, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From tears behind a church, to the peaceful contentment of a porch swing beneath the stars. From a desperate escape, to a life rich with purpose and love. "Prayers answered," she whispered, echoing the words that had marked the beginning of their story. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "Every day," he agreed, "every single day." And as they sat together, planning their future beneath the vast Arizona sky, Grace knew that some journeys, though they begin in fear and desperation, can lead to destinations more beautiful than anything the heart dared hope for. Her life with Isaac was proof of that, a testament to the power of one chance meeting, one moment of compassion, one cowboy who found a weeping woman and recognized in her the answer to his most fervent prayers.